Welcome to this database tutorial. In the previous video we looked at some of the key terms for databases, and we also looked at this particular database here that had some problems with it. And so what we're going to do today is try and solve some of these problems. Some of them obviously can be solved by a simple kind of, spell check, by looking at the content of some of the cells and correcting the spellings, such as Bob Jones. But I guess what's happening here is because we've got multiple entries for the same item. So we have 2 entries for Coke, we've got 2 entries for the long black, we've got 2 entries for water. What's happening is each time we add a new entry, we're increasing the risk that we're going to make a mistake. And so what we can do is structure our database in such a way that we only really ever enter in a particular piece of data once, and then we just join lots of dots between the data. So that way, we're much less likely to make a mistake when we're changing or when we're inserting data. And these mistakes when we change or insert data are called update anomalies or insert anomalies. And structuring a database using the rules of first normal form and second normal form help us to avoid these anomalies. So let's quickly look at what first normal form is. Essentially, first normal form is a way of structuring our databases so that we can start to build relationships between particular tables, and so that we can make our database as efficient as possible and also as accurate as possible. So these are the 4 essential rules of first normal form, that first normal form structure. So each table must have a primary key, and we'll define that in just a moment. All fields must be defined, and you'll remember last time a field kind of means like a column in a table. All fields must contain atomic data, and we'll talk about what atomic data is in a second, and there must be no repeating sets of data. So first let's look at each table must have a primary key. What a primary key is essentially a way of describing an entry into a database as a unique entry. And so usually we think about a primary key as like an ID number associated with something. So if we had a store and we had a database of our products, each product would have its own unique product ID. Because who knows, there might be 2 products that were very, very similarly named, or it came from different suppliers but had the same name. So each one must have its own unique identifier, its own ID. Or to use another example, if we were at a school and we had a whole bunch of students attending that school, it's possible that 2 of those students would have the same name, and so we assign students student IDs so that we can differentiate between those students with potentially the same name. So let's go back to our database. We've got this database here that's got 5 entries into it, but we don't really have a primary key yet. You could argue that the person's name is a primary key, but if we got another Bob Jones, a different Bob Jones who came along, then that would break this as being a primary key. So all we're going to do is essentially add a series of numbers before each of the entries. And now these numbers will act as a primary key. There's only going to be ever one entry into this database, one record that has the ID of 1. There's only going to be one record in this database that has the ID of 4. So now we've satisfied this first rule here. Each table must have a primary key. Let's start to look at let's actually look at that third rule there, the atomic data, because that's it's possibly a new term. So if we think about the word atomic, we might think of nuclear or nuclear bomb or atomic energy or something like that. But let's actually think of the root word atom. And what an atom is it's essentially like the smallest part of matter, right? The atom is like the basic building block of everything else. And I know that if you take physics or chemistry, you'll probably say actually there's pieces that are smaller than atoms, but an atom is essentially like the smallest kind of complete unit, I guess, in itself. So here, when we're thinking about atomic data, what we need to do is split our data up into its smallest components. Its smallest components that still make sense. So just trust me for the moment. In this table, there's one field, the name field, that does not have atomic data. Because, of course, a person's name is made up of their first name and their last name. So that data is not split into its smallest parts. So why, I hear you ask, can't we split up long black into long and black? Well, the reason that we can't is because if we split long and black, suddenly we would have data that didn't make sense. Like, what does long mean? Like, what's a long and what's a black? Separately, they mean nothing, but together, long black, they have meaning. So that's why we don't split up this column here. Let's actually apply this rule of first normal form now and split this field, this name field, into two fields, first name and last name. So I have taken up first names, and now I'll go, sorry, I've added first names, and now I'll go and remove those first names from the second field. And let's just make it look nice. So there we go. We've got now a primary key, and we've got our names split into first name and last name. So our data in this table is now atomic. Our data is split up into its smallest components. Alright, let's go look at this third rule. All fields must be defined. I'm going to cheat a little bit with this rule because I haven't introduced data types yet. But I'm going to say at the moment that means that we must give our fields kind of field names or headings. And that's pretty easy. This field here is people's first names, so I'm going to say first name as our field heading, or as our field name. This is obviously someone's last name, so we'll call that last name. This is their drink that they order, and this is the cost of the drink that they order. This is the second drink that they order, and the second cost of the cost of the second drink that they order, and this is the third drink that they order, and the cost of the third drink. And of course, we also need to give our primary key a field name, so let's call it customer, because this is a customer at our cafe ID. I'll just push these out a little bit so you can see the differences between them. Alright, so now we've got a database that has got a primary key, it's got atomic values, it's got defined field names. So now we just have to start to think about the final rule of first normal form, which is there must be no repeating sets of data. This is going to take a little bit longer to do, so I'm going to stop the video now and we'll do a part 2 of this video. Take a moment to practice this. Take a moment to do what I've just done with this database here, so that you're kind of familiar with what we're doing. And then once you're satisfied that you know what to do, start on the second video, that video that we will take away the repeating sets of data.